Welcome back to STL TV Live. I'm Sarah Bernard, and joining me in the studio to talk about his Traveling Ancient Egypt exhibit is researcher Norman Ross. Welcome to STL TV.
Thank you.
So, ancient Egypt. All right, how ancient is ancient Egypt?
Very ancient. Probably the most ancient in terms of civilizations that are in antiquity. Our exhibit starts from pre-dynastic period and the prehistoric period. Then we get into what I would say would be a conservative figure of years when Egypt began, and we're talking 3100 BC.
Okay, and how did you become interested in ancient Egypt? This is something you've obviously been studying for quite a while.
I would say about 7 years ago. I started studying some works by Ivan van Sertima on Egypt. He had, I think his first book was Egypt Revisited. And I became extraordinarily interested in Egypt because I've just never
What
knew
was
that.
it that was so fascinating about ancient Egypt when you read these works?
I was fascinated that it was in Africa.
Okay.
And that this was an African civilization.
Okay.
And I wanted to know more about it because when I was in school, grade school and college, there was very little study or even mention of ancient Egypt. And I went to a Catholic school, so the notion was, well, this was a pagan.
Right.
And I learned I learned something very, very different when I started a more intense study.
So something that was really very interesting to you. So what about it? Was it the people? Was it about the engineering? I mean, we hear about all these things about ancient Egypt that are still mind-blowing in terms of the engineering processes and things like that. Or were there particular personalities that were of interest to you? What intrigued you?
Well, it's the actual civilization, the things that came out of the civilization itself. When you look at ancient, now we like to use the term Kemet because the original African term or the original term used by the indigenous Kemetic people was Kemet.
So that's what we call the ancient Egyptians, or
yes,
okay.
K-E-M-E-T.
Okay.
In the hieroglyphics or Meduneta, the term is K-M-T because they didn't use vowels.
Sure. Right.
But historians and scholars like to use the term Kemet. And so they'll put the vowels in. Some spell it K-E-M-E-T, some spell it K-A-M-I-T.
So there's a whole different language going on here.
Right.
Okay.
It was renamed Egypt by the Greeks after, you're talking after 332 BC by Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
So the Arabs called Egypt El-Kemi, from which we get our term
And you learned
alchemy.
all this when you were doing this research.
Yes.
So this is all still sort of new knowledge, 7 years old. 7 years ago you started researching this, and so you were intrigued. How have you done your research? What else did you do after reading those things? Did you travel around?
I was not able to travel to Egypt, but there were about 37 books and other research information. At that time, I didn't have the internet available.
Right.
But extensive research allowed me to compile a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of diagrams, and what have you.
And you just displayed some of this information in City Hall, and we're seeing some of that on the screen right now. You were able to pull this information together and take this knowledge that you've learned. So we don't go anywhere. We're going to come back where there's so much more we want to talk about this display and about what you're doing with it now and all this knowledge.
Okay.
So we have so much more with Norman when we return. And remember to keep up with STL TV and all the great events going on around St. Louis. Friend us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can always watch us streaming live on stltv.net. We're back with more after this.